that was one of the things that they sold, that the stadium was not being particularly identified, but it was more of the memories. So one of the selling points was, well, we'll build a ballpark village around the stadium, and this will create economic development, but it'll create more of an experience. So you won't just go to the games, but there'll be, you won't just sit in the bleachers and remember how hard the bleachers were, or whatever the case may be. You'll say that you drank some O'Fallon Gold beer, or you went around the stadium and you went shopping, and so forth. So you turn it into an entire day. And that was definitely one of the things that they sold. And as it says throughout my dissertation, without selling it as that, it would have been very unlikely that the financing would have actually occurred. As you did allude to a little bit, Ballpark Village was actually the biggest piece of blight in the Midwest at one point, the biggest hole. Finally, they decided to cover up the hole, mainly for the All-Star game, because that's actually how we got the All-Star game, primarily. So they decided to make that into a parking lot. Also, currently, they're having softball games there, charity softball games. And right now, as of, I believe, last week, as far as I know, voting on that has been pushed back up in the Missouri Development Finance Board, and it's off the agenda. Obviously, we're in a current economic crisis. Just like all the states, you've got to balance the budget. And quite frankly, it's not on a high priority list when you're already cutting funding to things like education, and it's not a very popular idea to give more money out. And originally, also, Ballpark Village was conceptualized as something that the owners were going to completely pay for. With the apparent success of the stadium, at least from the Cardinals standpoint, they're actually now asking for an additional $100 million or so in subsidies. So that's a real hard sell right now. Particularly, it's even harder to sell the bonds, particularly when so many bonds are defaulting, even in St. Louis. For example, the courthouse is constantly, I believe even the Hilton recently defaulted on their bonds.
Now, I noticed that, yeah, they had some, and I believe it's in your dissertation also, but I've seen it elsewhere, that the Cardinals were quite surprised with the projected money that was made on sales tax and tax, because it was higher than what was originally anticipated.
Right. One of the big issues with the Cardinals stadium was there's something that is unusual in all of Major League Sports. Is there was something called a 5% amusement tax that was very specific to St. Louis, but essentially it said on all sporting events, we're going to hit them with an additional 5%. Now that was factored into the tickets, and most people did not realize that. What was rescinded and was a huge selling point was that 5% tax, and that allowed the Cardinals to turn around and then invest money into the stadium when they didn't get as much money. Originally, they wanted about $100 million directly from the state. In reality, probably through the back channels, they still got about $100 million. But it allowed them to turn around and reinvest that money. So that's a huge selling point.
It's almost like a TIF. It's like a tax increment financing system, but we're not going to call it that. So
right.
They're allowed to get the money.
Right. And the best part about it was, like I said, hardly anyone really realized it unless you're the Cardinals or the city, because it's not written on the ticket that that's what was going on. Now the Rams still have that. The Rams, there is a clause in the Rams, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, that the Rams have to stay in the top 75% of stadiums or arenas. And so there's a big concern there. Particularly in 2015, if they're not in that, the Rams can actually move. Where can they move? Well, probably LA, and that's about it. But that's going to be an issue, and there's talk of already rescinding their tax. The Blues in particular, as they're generally in an economic problem or crisis, they're also talking about possibly taking that tax off for them too. But that is unique to the Cardinals to remove that tax. And like I said, that's something the city was placing on them and not Major League Baseball or anyone else.
So we might see something like an amusement tax for Rams games or Blues games as a way of helping them to finance whatever they want to finance.
Yeah, I would see them very likely taking off that tax. Originally, there was concern that if they did this for the Cardinals, you would have to do it for the Rams. But the Rams got, as so many people said in my dissertation, such a sweetheart deal, or as some would say, a debacle in sports financing, that the Rams haven't even mentioned that. But come 2015, when that stadium is below the top 25% in the NFL, there certainly be talk.
Well, the way they're going with their games, who knows?
They're not going to have too much leverage coming in.
Now, let's go to the Village, because I'm sure some people are trying to connect that up. Where does it look like? I noticed your dissertation raised the idea that Lampkin had a lot of ideas, and a lot of it seemed like it was initially thrown at Illinois, because you were concerned about what the city and the county and the state on the Missouri side were not doing. So they actually appeared to be having very serious talks with the state of Illinois. Lampkin at the time met with the governor. You were talking about some sort of facility over in East St. Louis, and it looked like they might actually move. I mean, there were some other spots in St. Louis. I remember St. Peter's was offering to give them land, but nobody took that seriously. I think Maryland Heights thought that was all nonsense too. But the East St. Louis thing looked like a real possibility.
Right, and it was a legitimate, going into my dissertation, a lot of people, even the politicians I talked to and city administrators and so forth, honestly did not know how serious of a threat that was or was not. From further looking at it, East St. Louis was legitimately trying to get the Cardinals. Now, how much, if the Cardinals were actually going to do it, no one knows, but that certainly was used as leverage. What is unique, as some people may or may not know, with the city of St. Louis is it's not part of their own county. Yeah. Also, East St. Louis is in Illinois. It's very similar to what goes on in Kansas City. So even though it's part of the same city in theory, in reality, there's a lot of fragmentation and the governments do not want to work together. So really the easiest way to really take a politician off is to say, hey, we're going to move to East St. Louis. Now, obviously the idea would have been to gentrify East St. Louis. As most people know, it's a lot of crime there. It's mainly strip clubs and so forth, and industrial areas. So the thought was, we'll put that team over there, actually pretty much where the Casino Queen was, and we'll actually then possibly generate some legitimate local economic development, because that area has nothing. So the thought was, actually, if you want to maximize the argument of local economic development, you would put it there. Now, going back to Ballpark Village, again, the same concept was, if you're going to build a particular village, that would be, again, a great location. Because the other thing you gave up in the city of St. Louis that you have right there is 25 acres of grade A office space. Mm-hmm. St. Louis is very limited on that. It's landlocked because of once it annexed itself from the county. So that was another issue too, that if you really wanted to maximize St. Louis overall, if the governments were working together, then the best location probably would have been East St. Louis. But the St. Louis Cardinals would have been in East St. Louis, and from most of us who are around this area, particularly St. Charles, that's just completely unacceptable.
Yeah. So where are we with, is this thing going to happen or not happen to create something that looks like a ballpark village, which is some combination of businesses, I guess retail businesses locally, and I guess residential? Right.
The first phase originally was supposed to be the commercial part, and the second phase is residential. From talking to Mr. DeWitt, the president of the Cardinals, it's very unlikely. It's pretty much been tabled on the residential. Now, anybody that's really familiar with St. Louis right now understands that the residents they do have are not selling. They can't sell what they do have in lofts. So that's very unlikely, and that's probably not going to happen at all, or it's going to be in the very distant future. Now, the commercial end, like I said, they're still voting on that up in Jeff City, or actually it's been tabled again. So it's very unlikely that you're going to see anything happen that soon. Now, if you talk to the Cardinals, they'll say that they believe it's going to. If you talk to the politicians, they'll say the same thing. But in the near future, it's really hard to say, because until they give those additional subsidies to the Cardinals, nothing will happen. And then also on top of it, you got to actually sell the bonds, and that's a very hard sell right now in the economic downturn. And the hopes of the economic downturn getting better is actually very unlikely, and it's actually probably increased in some circles, particularly with bonds. So Ballpark Village, as they'll continue to say, or as you'll see throughout my dissertation, it's in the very near future. That's what they've been saying for about 7 or 8 years, and that's basically all I can say. We're going to be
seeing a lot of softball games for years to come.
Yes, and actually from talking to Mr. DeWitt, it's very cheap to play those softball games. So that may be something that you would want to look into here in Lindenwood.
So, okay, Eric. Well, I like the idea that we could introduce the audience, certainly that concept of the amusement tax, and wondering how that might play out with the Blues or the Rams down the road is something to maybe do a future story on. And we're not expecting much to ever see anything in the near future look like a baseball village. Maybe just many years of softball games to come.
Pretty much.
Thank you for joining us today.